Welcome everyone to the Hawkridge Systems Webinar Wednesday. Today's topic is SOLIDWORKS Enterprise PDM, and my name is Jordan Lemley and I'm a PDM product manager at Hawkridge Systems. And today we're going to be talking about data migration, a very popular topic for Enterprise PDM, and specifically data migration from Windows folders to EPDM and the basic process for that. So let's go ahead and get started. Kind of what we're going to be covering today is some of the migration basics, whether that's custom properties, references, duplicates, revisions, all of those different topics, as well as some useful migration tools that might help you as you're trying to figure out how files are going to get from where they are now to inside the vault. So the first place we're going to start is with the migration basics, and we'll start out by talking about the custom properties in SOLIDWORKS. So the way that custom properties interface with Enterprise PDM is if you've got a document that has some sort of custom property in it, whether it's a SOLIDWORKS document or Word file, whatever that happens to be, those can get tied into the data cards of EPDM. So for example, I've got a SOLIDWORKS part that has some metadata or information about it that's stored in the data card, and some of that information is in the custom properties of the SOLIDWORKS document itself. And so you can push and pull information from that data card. And just a little tip or trick for those of you who are maybe a little new to the data card interface, when you click on this blue question mark icon, you can see what variable and what custom property are mapped to these fields on the data card. So I can see that this description field is tied to a description variable, and that's tied to a custom property called description. And so when you are looking to import files into EPDM, you'll need to make sure that you have all of those custom properties that you want to get pulled into the data cards. You want to make sure that those are listed, that you know what those are, and that those names are consistent. So if someone has something called part number, document number, and someone else calls it docno or partno, you want to make sure that those are consistent so that they can get pulled into the same field rather than coming in separate fields, because you can only pull in one of those named properties into a field at a time. So it's important to make sure that those names are straightened out. And it's also important to make sure that those are defined on the data card before you import the data in, because if you import the data and then you start adding custom property mappings onto the data card, it's not going to pull that information from the file until the next time you check it in. So let's take an example of that I have set up here, where I've got a file sitting in my custom properties folder here, this battery part. If I copy this in, it's got a let's take a look at its custom properties real quick. So if I look at the custom properties, I'm going to see that it has a field in there called description 2, and it's got a value in there, but that's not on my data card. There's no value on my data card for description 2. So when I go ahead and save this into my vault, save as, there we go. If I save this into my vault, it's going to prompt me for the data card, and you'll see that I don't have a field on here called description 2. So if I import this file, copy and paste, or just do a save as, either one works. Once that's inside my vault, and there's no value for that description 2, the only way to get it to come back, even after adding it into the data card, is to check it out again. So let's say I were to go in to the vault, take a look at the data card, and add a field for that description 2. And right now, let's say that I didn't have that variable there. I could create a new variable, description2. And it's going to be tied to custom property, DESC2. The name and the spelling is really important. And I'll make sure that it's SLD-PRT. Tie that to description2. Save my data card. If I were to refresh on that part, we'll see that the field appears, but there's no value there. And I'm not going to see a value there until I check it back in. And now description will display. So that's why it's really important for you to define all of those metadata properties, the custom properties in your SOLIDWORKS documents, so that those get pulled in on the initial import, because you don't want to be going back through and checking out files and checking them back in and creating new versions of the files just to add additional metadata information in because you forgot to at the beginning. So that's one important aspect to keep in mind. The second aspect to keep in mind as well is references. So EPDM is not magic. It's not going to fix a bunch of broken references that are that you've got broken outside of EPDM when you dump them in and it just finds everything okay. It still needs a little more sophistication to get those files in with clean references. So you want to make sure that you're bringing in files with clean references into EPDM, because garbage in is going to be garbage out. So one thing that you can do though is you can use some of the tools that are built into EPDM to update references that are broken. So I do have an example of that set up here. So let's say number one, I bring in some files that are complete. I've got a flashlight folder in here that's got assemblies, parts, drawings, and I'm going to copy those into my vault. So it's just copy, paste, and then once I have copied and pasted those into my vault, I can then check them in. I can either check them in at the folder level, or I can dig down into the contents of those folders and select the top level assembly and check that in, and it'll grab all the references. And that's nice. Those files are there together. Their references are complete, and so I can just simply check those files in all together. And now they've been added into the vault. Now what happens if things are not so nice? So for example, I have the same assembly, but I broke the assemblies into an assembly folder, and I put the parts into a part folder. I even renamed the battery with a new name. So I did a lot of things you're not supposed to do with SOLIDWORKS documents in Windows Explorer, putting files in new folders, changing names of files, doing lots of things to break the references. So I'm going to go ahead and import the broken folder, paste it in. And once I take a look at that assemblies folder and try and check it in, it's going to give me some warnings and say that it can't find the files. And obviously I did some things to it to break those references, added it to a new folder, gave some new names, and so it's having trouble finding those references. Well, in EPDM, there's a tool called Update References. So if I go to the light assembly and go to Update References, I get access to this tool where I can select these files that it can't find and say find files. And I can say, all right, I know those are in the parts folder, and if there's any subfolders I can search for those. Click next and it'll go through and find those. You see it has some issues with that battery 1 or battery A because I renamed it to battery AA-1. So I'll go ahead and address that once I've got those updated, the other files. So what I can do with that file in particular is I can choose replace, and I can say, all right, what file do I want to replace that with? And I know that I renamed that to 1. So I can take that file and replace it with the new file name. So I'm able to replace that document and update the references. And so now when I go to check in the assembly, it finds all the references okay, and I can check that in. So that's one way that you can use the EPDM update references tool to update any kind of broken references that you have coming into the vault. One caveat with this tool is that this update references tool can only be run when you are first checking a file into the vault. So after you check this assembly in, if you checked it in with its broken references, you're not going to be able to use the update references tool like I just did. It's only before the files go in for the first time. There's also another tool that you can utilize if there's a certain directory where you know a lot of files that a broken reference tends to live in. If there's a certain folder where that happens to live, you can go to the admin tool, which is located in all programs under SOLIDWORKS Enterprise PDM and Administration. And on the local user account, you can go to local settings, and under settings, you can select external references, and you can add a folder for EPDM to look in every time if it can't find a reference. So it says, all right, if I'm checking in files and I need to look for references, it's going to look in this folder every single time. And if there's any subfolders, it's not recursive, so you would have to add the subfolders underneath of that. But at this point, it would go and look in that legacy designs folder, that shared library, and find those files on initial check-in and make those associations. If you do have a lot of broken assemblies and they're all the parts tend to be in one directory or another. You don't necessarily want to have this enabled all the time because it can slow the check-in process because it's looking through these different folders, but you can use that for searching for missing references in a particular directory if that happens to be your situation. All right. So that was references, and now let's take a look at duplicates. How do you handle duplicate files inside EPDM? So as you're bringing files into the vault, it would be important if you are trying to eliminate duplicate files for you to go under file types and eliminate those duplicate files from ever entering the vault. So in this case, maybe I've got an assembly that I want to disallow duplicate files for. And same thing with drawings, same thing with parts. And I can say do not allow duplicate files. Now obviously I could check in duplicate files and then turn these settings on after the fact if for some reason I needed to check in a bunch of duplicate files and then from that point on not allow any more duplicates. You could do that. It's not going to affect anything with pre-existing duplicates, but if you wanted to start fresh and not have any duplicates ever enter into the vault, you can set those up before the check-in process happens of your files coming from Windows Explorer. So in this case, I've already got some flashlight files, and I'm going to go ahead and copy some of those in just to see what happens when I try and copy in files that already exist. The names are already taken for those parts, assemblies, and drawings. So I go through and copy those, and what I get is a listing of all those files that have duplicates, and it lets me know where that file exists. So there's already a file called clip, and its duplicate lives in broken/parts. So I get a listing of the part that exists and where the duplicate file is that exists, and some information about that file. So this allows me to also export the list and get a report on all those duplicates. So that's one way that you can deal with that. It also won't let you check in those documents that are duplicates even if you wanted to. So if I tried to check those in, I would get a bunch of errors related to file name is not unique, and it wouldn't let me check those in the first place. So I do get a warning that those files are duplicates even before that process takes place. So That's duplicate files. And then revisions. We want to talk about revisions. Revisions are important in EPDM. It's the way to track how files are released and what versions are being used. So it's an important process. And I want to highlight one of the workflows that I have set up here. So if I take a look at this CAD files workflow where files start out at work in process, go to pending approval and released, or they can just avoid that whole approval process and go straight to released. At this release state, it's going to go from revision A, and then through a new release, come back and go to revision B, C, and so on. The way that that happens is tied to the database itself. So what's important to note there is, let's take a look at some example files. So if I were to take one of these parts that we've got set up that doesn't have a revision currently, I push it through the workflow, it goes no approval required, push it through, gets revision A, push it through again, change state, new release, change state, new approval required, and we'll go to B. What's nice about the custom properties inside SOLIDWORKS is that the data cards can read those in. So, for example, I can read in the revision A for a file or revision B. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the database itself doesn't recognize those revisions, but there's a solution for that we can pursue. So, for example, I've got these documents, revision A, revision B, and if, for example, I brought in a document or I changed the revision value to E for some reason, I was skipping some information. Let's say I brought in an E document. Well, EPDM's never seen the E document before. It needs to make sure that the revision is updated to the next value so that the next time it goes through the workflow, it knows where to go. So what I can do in that case is I can increment the revision. And that will update it in the history so it goes from B to C. And I can keep going through that process until I get to the appropriate value. Now, obviously, you don't necessarily want to enable users to have that ability because it's not updating the actual value in the data card. So what is it updating, and why does that process exist? So I want to take a look at the workflow and how it updates revision values. So in that no approval required transition, there's a couple actions that are going on. One is called set variable, and it's taking the revision value that exists in the data card and it's updating it to a new value. And it gets that new value from another table in the database called next revision. So the way I like to think of it is like this. In EPDM, there's a SQL database, and that SQL database has some values for each file. So this particular file might be sitting at a revision A. It's also got a value next revision B that corresponds to the next value in the series based on how you've defined that revision sequence. Now, the first thing that happens in the transition is I update the revision from revision to next revision. So it says, all right, I've got a revision A right now. I want to update that to B. So it copies this value B and overwrites that value. Now, the second thing that happens is this inc revision step in that transition. That inc revision updates the next revision field to the next value. If I didn't have this next inc revision step, if I removed that, then what would happen is every time a file moves through this workflow, a revision B A document would get updated to B. So A would go to B. But this next revision value would never get updated, so it would perpetually go at B. So that's why I have this inc revision step that's located in my transition in order to update that to the next value that it needs to go to, revision C. So that's good, that makes sense, but what happens sometimes when you're importing documents into EPDM and they have an existing revision value is those things can get out of sync. So you can push a revision A file through and it goes to A, it doesn't go to B, or it goes from revision C to revision A, because EPDM's never seen that file. So when it comes into the vault, let's say that it reads in value C for the revision, the value that it has for next revision is A. So we have to do a little bit of cleanup on those values in order to get it to populate to the next value. So I've got some example files that will do just that. I'll go ahead and close down this workflow. And what I'm going to do is import one of these files and show you what happens. So I've got this revisions folder, and I've got files that are sitting at revision B. If I copy this file in and I just paste it in here. Oh, let me turn off my duplicate file warnings for this segment of the webinar. We'll disallow duplicate files there for assemblies, parts, and drawings, and then check that in. And what I'll see is the revision is sitting at B, and it's in the workflow at work in process. Let's say that I go to no approval required. It's going to go from B to A because it's never seen that before. So what we need to do is take that into account. So I'll go ahead and delete that out, and I'm going to create a workflow specifically for this case. So I've got the CAD files workflow. I'm going to create another workflow called Legacy Designs. And I'm going to make sure that this is pulling in all CAD files because it's going through the initial import. And once that import is done, I can switch this workflow off, essentially, not equal to CAD files. So I'll turn off the CAD files workflow from catching all of my documents, and I'll create this new workflow and say imported, and then a new state here for update revision. And I'll also create a link between this workflow and the other workflow. So I'll say all files that go through this need to end up at the released state in CAD files, and I'll create a transition there, an automatic transition. It says send to released, and switch that to automatic. And I'll create another transition between imported and update revision and say update revision A. So this will take revision A documents and make sure that they get the next value in the series, which is B. So I'll go to conditions, and I'll make sure to read in the condition of the revision. Not the revision here, because that's the database revision. I'm looking for the data card revision, which is these variable values. So I'll take this revision that has a little x2 next to it and say revision A. I also want to make sure that it's a text equal to, not contains, because if it was contains, then any document that had a revision AA, it would pull that into, and I just want A. So I'll say text exactly equal to A, only let those through this transition, and by making it automatic, then I just copy that in. EPDM reads the revision value and then updates it based on the action that I've given it. So I'll say that I want to increment the revision as part of the transition, save my workflow, and then if I go to the revision number, I can choose the alpha component and reference that in my transition. So when I go to actions, I can say reset that revision to B, because I want the next revision in the series to be B. And so I'll change this to update revision A, and I can even copy this transition to accommodate revision B. So I'll right click on that, go to copy, paste, and just take the skeleton of that, revision B, condition is revision B, revision numbers, update to C, save that, and then the next time that I push these files in, copy them from their directories, copy those in, paste, and then when I check these in, they should go to released and they should get the appropriate revision value. So I'll go check these documents in, and I should see revision A is added to that document. It's sitting at released. If I push it through the workflow again, new release, no approval required, it should go to B, and that's what I see. And the same thing should happen for my B files. Take this file, push it through the workflow, change state, new release, change state, no approval required, and it should go from B to C, and that's what we see. So you want to make sure that during that legacy design workflow that you're testing these to make sure that they're working, they're updating the revisions properly. But that's essentially how you would update those revisions automatically, so that it just reads in the value and you can go from A to Z or however far you went in your revisioning scheme, and you can just copy and paste those transitions in order to make your life a little bit easier. But essentially you can update all of those revisions so they go to the right workflow state, they get the correct revision, and that's how we would handle revisions for importing from Windows into EPDM. So that's some of the basics of what we covered so far between custom properties, references, duplicate files, how to enable those, how to update references, how to import those custom properties, make sure that those are all there, and then make sure that the revisions are synced with the EPDM workflow. And now what I want to do is take a look at a few tools that can help you during this process. We've got a free tool from Hawkware, which is our software design and software add-ins that we make for SOLIDWORKS and Enterprise PDM. We've got a free property report that you can run on a directory and see what properties exist. So you just want to get a look at what properties are people using, what properties exist inside the files. And then there's a tool from Custom Tools, one of our partners, that can allow you to update those or manipulate them, rename them, convert them, merge them, that kind of thing, all within a batch format. And then for more complex implementations, we have another partner called IES that has an Enterprise PDM file importer. So we'll talk about each of those, starting with Hawkware. So Hawkware is available on our website, hawkwareapps.com. You can go down to products, look at Hawkware for SOLIDWORKS, and you can download Hawkware Tools, and that's a free download for your SOLIDWORKS. You can also use TreeView Studio, which is a really cool visualization tool for assemblies and looking at the sub-assemblies and that kind of thing. But what I'm working with right now is the Hawkware Tools, and it's, like I said, a free download, and you can run using the tools a property report and look at all the properties for a particular file. So I'm going to go ahead and click Browse and find the directory where those files are located. I've got mine stored in this particular location. I've got a conveyor assembly. And when I click on Find Files, it'll go through and run a report and see what custom properties exist in those documents. And then I can export that to an Excel sheet and get a better interface for looking at those custom properties. So if you want to know what custom properties you're using, you can just point SOLIDWORKS Hawkware Tools to this particular directory, whatever it happens to be, and find all of the properties that are used. So that's the Hawkware property report. Another tool that we have is the property propagator. Once again, this is from Custom Tools, like I said. So if I look at Custom Tools and property propagator, what this allows you to do is look in a particular directory, say, all right, in this folder, I want to look for all files that meet certain criteria, whether it's in the subfolder, assemblies, parts, or drawings. I want to change a file property, custom property name. I want to rename it. I want to add a custom property to all my documents. I want to delete a particular property, and it has all of these different functions that you can use to update those values in a batch format. So really useful tool for updating those in a batch format. I think it's one of our more powerful tools and pretty reasonably valued and priced. And then the final option that we have is the Enterprise PDM file importer. So we have a partner called IES that we use sometimes for more complicated migrations from Windows that just, there's more rules, there's more things that need to get sorted out, more data that this EPDM importer can really allow you to leverage. So those are some of the tools. Now, let's say that you do get into a situation where things are getting a little complex, you need some help, maybe you might need to consider a migration partner to help you out, someone like IES. So in that case, when do you know that you should probably be looking at a migration partner like IES? Well, there's a few things that you want to understand. Do you have a large number of files? And this isn't just, do you have a bunch of files that you're pulling into EPDM from Windows? This is, do you have thousands of files and they all have similar kinds of problems with them, and it's just going to take a lot of time to go through all of those files and update properties or update references or clean up in some sort of fashion, and it's just, it can be a mountainous amount of time that it's going to take to get your hands on that data and get it cleaned up before it comes in. That's when it might be more efficient to just go with a migration partner that has a tool and some experience in that migration process to get those files in to EPDM. Also, if you're working with a short timeline, you want to get your files into the vault and you don't want to spend some time cleaning up data properties, finding missing references, duplicates, those sorts of things, and you just want to get those files in. That can be another instance where you might want to consider looking at a migration partner. Also, if you have a lack of resources, you don't have someone you can pull away to run through and do those kinds of data processing before you get the files into the vault. And then once again, if you have a lot of duplicates, you have a lot of missing references, you need some sort of renaming or standardization of file names as they're coming into the vault, you need some sort of rule-based cleanup. That's where a migration partner can be really, really valuable and actually save you a lot of time, money, energy, and effort in that cleanup process. So that's when we would recommend you start looking at a migration partner to save you that time during that migration process. So if you are interested in any of those tools, whether it's the custom property propagator or it's the IES file import tool or the migration process, talking with a migration partner, these would be the guys to talk to. John Toes is our PDM sales manager for the US, and Scott Killen is the PDM sales manager for Canada. So if you have questions about those implementations, those complex migrations, feel free to send those guys an email. Ask them if you can get access to one of those tools or start a conversation about that, and we'll get you in touch with the right people. So that's what we were able to cover today. We were able to cover some of the migration basics, talking about custom properties, how important those are to have mapped out before you start bringing files in, making sure that references are updated, and then how to use EPDM to update references that maybe are broken, how to eliminate duplicate files from EPDM, as well as how to update revisions either manually or through a workflow automation tool to make sure that the revisions are intact and up to date. And then we also talked about some migration tools that are available to help you out during that process to get us an idea of the scope of what custom properties exist, how to update those properties in a batch format if necessary, and to also consider a migration partner, whether that's IES or using one of their tools. So I want to thank you for joining today's webinar, and if you have any other questions about file imports or EPDM and those sorts of things, feel free to contact me about anything you saw in this presentation. If you have questions specifically about your implementation or as you're going through the process, feel free to contact our support. They're always there. And also be sure to take advantage of our recorded webinars on SOLIDWORKS EPDM. There's a lot of really good tutorials on our website that you can check out like this that are hosted and available for your consumption whenever you have the time to take a little bit and learn more about EPDM and how to better leverage that for your company. So I want to thank you again for joining, and hopefully we'll see you again on another Hawkridge Systems webinar Wednesday.